So, hi, thank you very much for being here today. My name is Dora, and you can also see here Sebastian is the two of us who organize the Kesher events. Lovely to have you all here. So many familiar faces. Thank you for joining us once again. And if you're joining us for the first time, we'll just say a very brief introduction about ourselves. We are located in Budapest in Hungary, and the name Kesher means connection, and it's a project that aims to explore Jewish heritage, culture, and present day all over the world. Today, it's a bit of more of a virtual tour to the past, although we have had other sessions on Ukraine where we very much touched upon the present as well. But today we're going to visit shtetls of Ukraine with Evgenia Kempinski, who is here with us and is going to be the speaker today. She's originally from St. Petersburg, but she's lived in different places, currently joining us from Barcelona, where she's also guiding tours. So if you are planning to be in Barcelona, you can also reach out to her for live tours. But she had a tour company in St. Petersburg, and she guides us still virtually in the former Soviet Union and many other places to share with us Jewish heritage. So I'll pass the word to her. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll open it up for Q&A after the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dora. Thank you, Sebastian, for inviting me. Thank you for this wonderful introduction. I'd say good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending where you're joining us from. My name is Evgenia Kempinski. It's true, I'm live from Barcelona, and I was born and raised in St. Petersburg, and part of my family originates from Ukraine. I'm Jewish. I'm a classical Ashkenazi Jew with roots back in Ukraine, Poland, and Belarus. And today we're going to visit several towns that used to be populated with Jews. Some of them can be called as shtetls, meaning it's a very small town. Some of them are rather bigger cities, but with very rich Jewish history, and all of them are located in Ukraine. Let me start sharing my screen. And honestly, see, the subject of the shtetl life, the story of the shtetl as this historical and cultural phenomenon, part of our Ashkenazi Jewish identity. It's one of the most interesting subjects, never ending. And today, going from one place to another, I will try to explain and show you certain features of the traditional shtetl life, how we can see it, looking at the old photographs and learning the history of, for example, the towns of our ancestors. So we will travel on the territory of Ukraine. It's this giant country which borders Russia on the east, Belarus on the north, Poland on the west, a little bit of Slovakia and Hungary on the west, and Moldova and Romania down in the south. We will spend our time today in the western part of Ukraine. When we speak about Ashkenazi Jewish history, when we speak about the history of Jews in Eastern Europe, we have to remember that there was this giant state that does not exist anymore on the political map. It used to be called Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It was a union of two states, Poland, which was down to the southwest, and Lithuania up into the northeast. They came together, forming one state in the mid of the 16th century. If we look at this map right now on the screen, we will see that the state covered incredible territory from Baltic to Black Sea almost. And today there are different states located on this territory. It's a little bit of Russia, it's Latvia, part of Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine. 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, it was one state. And it's the state that's starting from the Middle Ages, starting already from 11th century was richly populated with Jews. It was Polish landlords and Lithuanian, let's say, kings, to make it easier, that started inviting Jews from German lands to come and settle here to help them develop their territory, to help build cities, organize markets, and develop different crafts, and also manage their properties. And life in German lands in the course of the Middle Ages, the life of Jews in German lands was becoming worse, worse, and worse, with constant expulsions, with lots of very difficult laws to limit Jewish lives, including, for example, at the moment there was a law in a certain part of modern day Germany that only allowed the oldest son of the family to get married. So Jews were looking for other options, and step by step, starting with a very small kind of flow of people, and then the flow which turned into a kind of bigger river, these lands of Eastern Europe got populated with Jews. Jews here became people of the town, and in the most cases, the managers of the landlord's property. That was the key role of Jews here. At the end of the 18th century, the territory of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was divided, fully divided, among three empires. This giant state disappeared from the political map. Everything that you see here, dark gray, light gray, and pink, was annexed by Russia. So gray, light gray, and pink. Then this yellow and orange went to Germany, Prussia, and then green and light green to Austria. So out of a sudden, not moving anywhere, not changing their house, Jews fell asleep being subject to the Polish crown, but woke up being subject to Russian crown, Prussian, or Austrian. And so the fortune of the Jews changed this way, and even Jews of the neighboring towns after the partition of Poland would be subject to different laws, and so their life would be very, very different. When we look at that part of Poland that was occupied, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, that was occupied by Russian Empire, it was the biggest part. And with that territory, Russia received hundreds of thousands of Jews. And in Russia, the special law was made at the very end of the 18th century, the law which is known as the Pale of Settlement. It means the invisible wall, invisible border. So the territory which is marked light yellow was kind of reserved as the territory where Jews were able to settle wherever they wanted and move within these borders freely. But Jews were not allowed to cross this eastern border and go into the interior provinces of Russia. It's like separate territory within the state. So Pale of Settlement was richly populated with Jews, and the towns that we're going to visit today were located here within these lands, or we will also see a couple of towns that belonged to Austria those days. The first region where I want to take you is called Bukovina. It's a very interesting region. It's located in the north, in southwest of Ukraine. It's marked with orange color here, and you see northern part of it is in Ukraine and southern part of it is in Romania. The borders in this part of the world changed many, many, many times. So the same town, like if you look for the town of your ancestors, the same town, depending on the historical period, on the year that your ancestors, for example, left it, or the period where they have been living there, could have been part of Russia or Poland or Ukraine or Romania or Austria because of the change of borders. So Bukovina, it's a very interesting territory. It was not part of Poland. It was part of Moldova. Then it belonged to Ottoman Empire. The minute I say this word, we understand this is the territory of not exclusively Ashkenazi culture. It's the territory when Ashkenazi and Sephardic cultures met and mixed, because Ottoman Empire was home to the giant, the biggest community of Sephardic Jews. Then, after it was occupied by Austria, then by Romania, and it's only since the Second World War that this territory belongs to first Soviet Ukraine and then independent Ukraine. So you can imagine how many times Jews of Bukovina changed their language, changed their clothes, changed their cuisine, changed everything, adjusting to the new reality. This is the map of different regions of Ukraine. Today, we will visit Bukovina, we will visit Podolia, one of probably the two, like four most traditional Jewish regions of Ukraine would be Bukovina, Galicia. We spoke about Galicia when we did a talk about Lviv, and Brody, Volhynia, and Podolia. So today we'll see Bukovina, Podolia, and Volhynia, the most traditional, the territory of the shtetls. And let's come to see the city. It's not a traditional small shtetl, but it's a rather bigger city. It's called Chernovtsi, and it will become a very good example for us to look at different aspects of Jewish life. So Chernovitz, the Jews settled here already in the beginning of the 15th century, and the city kept accommodating the new waves of Jews. If at the beginning they were some Sephardic Jews here, then in the 17th century there was new wave of Ashkenazi Jews, Polish Jews running here, trying to escape the pogroms of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. We will say this name quite a few times today, because those terrible pogroms of Bogdan Khmelnytsky in the middle of the 17th century determined so much of Jewish life in this part of the world, devastating Jewish communities, burning Jewish communities. It's probably the problem with that story is that we do not have exact numbers, but from what we understand from different explanations given by the Jews who survived and who saw it in their books, it was the horror that Jews had never seen before. In this territory, already by the end of the 18th century, Jews had the right to own real estate, so they could buy a piece of land and build their house. The majority of Jews in Chernovitz preferred to live near the synagogue or near the central streets of the city, so to be closer to the shopping areas, simply because so many of them were involved in different crafts or in different businesses. By the end of the 18th century, when Bukovina was now occupied by Austria, there were about 600 Jewish families living already in Chernovitz. It's quite a large Jewish community. Bukovina is a very interesting territory. If you have any roots here, you might want to know that it's the territory with unique high degree of tolerance, both within the Jewish community and also in relations to other ethnic groups. Its unique feature, as a rule, there was very little tolerance between Jews and non-Jews, and the constant conflicts between Jews of the city and the non-Jews living in the villages surrounding the city on one hand, and also there were constant conflicts within the Jewish community. Original religious conflicts, financial conflicts, political conflicts. The history of every Jewish town, at least in Eastern Europe, can be easily told through the conflicts within the community. Here, Bukovina was different. It lived the Jews here lived with the sense of being part of something bigger, with a sense of being part of more like international life. In general, Jews of Chernovitz and generally Bukovina were more, let's say, more secular than the traditional Jews of, let's say, Podolia and Galicia and some and the other regions of, for example, Ukraine. It's also a Jewish community who spoke, first of all, German. The Jews of the towns, Jewish intellectuals, created Jews, they would specifically learn German because they felt they were the citizens of Austria, and Austria was among the first, not the first, but among the first countries that started the process of emancipation. It's Jews, and so Jews accepted the idea and learned German, willing to gain better place in Austrian society. But aside of that, that would be Romanian. I mean, Hebrew, I don't mention Hebrew. Hebrew and Yiddish, we do not need to mention that. Yiddish, as Mama Lashon, everybody spoke it. Hebrew, all boys had to learn to read Hebrew and Aramaic, starting from Heder, where they were sent at the age of 3, and then continue through Heder and then yeshiva. Now, beside of that, there would be Romanian, Russian, Hungarian. So it's a very interesting mix of languages and very interesting mix of business connections. If we come to Chernovitz today, we still walk down the synagogue street, former the main street of the Jewish quarter. Very few of the original old houses survived the Soviet times and all the fires of the 20th century. So we still have a feeling of that sense of these are former Jewish homes. These homes formerly belonged to the Jewish families of Chernovitz. The synagogue, so-called Grosse Schule of Chernovitz, still exists. It's in a very, very poor condition. It's typical for so many Masonry synagogues in Eastern Europe. They exist because even Nazis were not able to destroy them. They are built with really wide, strong walls. But there is nobody today to take good care of it, to pay for the restoration. So slowly, step by step, they're getting destroyed. This is the old photograph of the main Chernovitz synagogue. You see it's significant building, taller than anything around it. Even in that building falling into despair, there are still some of the old ceiling decorations exist. We can still read a little bit of Hebrew. We can still see the views of Jerusalem created by some unknown Jewish artist some good time ago here. If you look at this photograph, it's the postcard from Chernovtsi, and then see this tall, it's the synagogue building. And it's surrounded with so many of the regular residential houses. If you look at this photograph, there is something that all these residential buildings have, and the synagogue does not have. Look at these little white things. These are chimneys, right? So I remind you, we're in Eastern Europe, it's cold there. You can't survive the winter if you do not have a way to heat your house. But those big synagogues, main synagogues of the towns, grosse Schule, normally did not have any heat, and you would never see the chimney up on the roof. Why is that? Because the room is too big. You can't heat it. It's too expensive to heat it with firewood. And so they were even called often as the cold synagogue. And so on a daily basis, it was not used on a daily basis. On a daily basis, men would, if they wanted, they would go to Beit Midrash. And then the synagogue would be open for the Friday night or for the holidays. And then there are so many people there, and they only come for an hour or hour and a half, and they can survive it. So you don't need to spend money on heating such giant building. If you browse the photographs of old synagogues across Eastern Europe, you will find the same thing everywhere. The main big synagogues, old big synagogues, were old cold synagogues. Here in Bukovina, under the rule of Austrian government, Jews enjoyed a high degree, not only tolerance, but also high degree of freedom. Here, even though Chernovitz was a big city, Jews made up to 60% of the city's population. It's a lot, especially keeping in mind the fact that Jews historically, every town here in Eastern Europe, Jews occupied the heart, the center of the town. The closer to the market square, the better. The more expensive the land, the better business you can have. And so, walking around the central part of Chernovitz, you will find lots of buildings that historically belonged to Jews. Browsing through the old photographs, you will find restaurants and hotels that were operated by Jews. Bed and breakfast, hotel business, it's mainly Jewish business in Eastern Europe. Restaurants, cafeterias, wine shops, it's a Jewish business, one of the oldest historical Jewish businesses in Eastern Europe, as well as, for example, photography, as well as cinema, as well as, for example, printing the postcards. Much of it was operated by Jews. This is so-called temple synagogue. It means it's the synagogue of the Reformed Jews, modernized Jews, so-called Maskilim, the followers of Haskalah movement, the followers of the Jewish Enlightenment. So it's the movement that came to Eastern Europe from Austria and Germany, and Bukovina was among the first territories in Eastern Europe to accept it and welcome it. It's the synagogue that was built according to the standards to look as the classical temple with high ceilings, with the dome. Very often there was an organ, even an organ installed in such synagogues. And usually the membership would be very expensive. And so the most educated and the Jews of some new modernized professions would choose to belong to this synagogue. This is something interesting. It's the Jewish National House. It's the big Jewish cultural center. Which was built here in Chernovitz, close to this new modernized synagogue in the beginning of the 20th century. The building exists today, but now it's just apartment house. It's not a center or anything. So in general, Chernovitz, it's just as an example, but at the turn of the centuries, you have all different new ideas coming into Eastern Europe, and of course the ideas of Zionism. So here on the second floor of the hotel, the Halutzim school was open, so to prepare Jewish youth for making Aliyah to the land of Israel. Of course, there was an orphanage. Historically, if we think of the story of orphans, we shall remember that in Eastern Europe, at the turn of the centuries, by the beginning of the 20th century, every fourth Jewish child experienced the death of at least one parent. Only think of it. The number of orphans was constantly growing because of the tremendous poverty, because of the anti-Jewish violence. And so at the beginning, community would treat it simply dispersing those orphans among their relatives. But at some point it was impossible, so because there were too many. So the wealthier communities would start building orphanages. So if you see the Jewish orphanage in the town, you know this Jewish community was prosperous. It flourished. It had enough money to organize and sponsor it. This is, by the way, the stadium that belonged to Maccabi. Wherever you see the name Maccabi, like sports club Maccabi, you understand that the Zionist organization was very strong because it's only Zionists, the Zionist organizations, who would name anything after Maccabi and who would invest into making Jews making sports. Like before that, this idea did not exist in the traditional Jewish shtetl. Nobody would go and do sports. It's just this strange idea. But then the Zionist organization would organize sport teams and, of course, name them Maccabi. So, but next door to the wealthy and successful Jews, you have Lower Town, the town where poor Jews live, the town which gets flooded very often, the town where you have a problem with drinking water, the problem where you can get poisoned just drinking water from the public well. The part of the town where you have a very high rate of typhus and other diseases, where Jews make little money buying and selling the smallest things on the streets. The part of the town where majority of Chernovitz Jews lived, and we remind ourselves that again, in this area in Eastern Europe, in Jewish communities, no less than 25 to 30% of Jews lived below the poverty, completely depending on the support provided to them by their fellow community members. And this is the modern view of the streets in that lower town of Chernovitz, and the modern view of the synagogue and the kosher food, the Jewish religious life today in Chernovitz, as well as in the most of Ukraine, is being taken care by Chabad Lubavitcher movement. It's typical for all of the post-communist territories. Let's come to another town of Bukovina, Vizhnitsa. Vizhnitsa is famous because of the Vizhnitsa Hasidim. Hasidim movement was extraordinarily popular here in Ukraine, and they were different Hasidic leaders, and so in every leader would form his own court with a group of his followers. And to be honest, for the Jewish community of the town, it was very good, financially very good, to have strong and famous Hasidic rabbi or tzaddik, because it would attract more Jews to come, and those Jews who come to meet him, some of them were wealthy, and they would rent the room in the hotel, they would go to the market, they would eat in a tavern. So having such Hasidic rabbi would make the city wealthier. With Vizhnitsa, one moment of the Vizhnitsa Jewish story. Now, okay, this territory was occupied by Austria. Austrian government had to decide what to do, set up new rules. So it looked at Vizhnitsa and decided that Vizhnitsa was not a town, but a village. And in the village, people have to do agriculture, but Jews were not involved in agriculture. So out of a sudden, Austrian government decided that whoever is not involved in agriculture has to leave Vizhnitsa, because we think it's the village. So this is just one moment. There were hundreds of such moments all over Europe. We, Ashkenazi Jews, our ancestors living in Europe, whether it be Western or Eastern Europe, throughout centuries, learned very simple thing. Whatever comes to the government can never be good. Any changes, any new law that comes from the government changes your life for worse. So the further away you are from the government, the better, the safer. And then here in Eastern Europe, the system of bribing flourished. Any problems with new laws, Jewish community always tried to solve using two major ways. Every Jewish community, and Jewish community in Vizhnitsa is not an exception, would have a person, wealthy Jew, well-educated Jew, the Jew who could speak the language of the state, who would be in charge to defend the community, who would be in charge of the relations with the local authorities, and who would be in charge of bribing the local authorities, so to preserve the Jewish community, to help Jewish community survive and avoid those terrible laws. And that would be true for Austria, for Prussia, and for Russia Empire, including. What you have on the screen right now, that's the marketplace of Vizhnitsa, and the houses facing the marketplace all belonged to Jews, and the wealthiest Jews had their houses here. So you can clearly see those two-story buildings. These ones belonged to the leaders, the heads of the Jewish community, the wealthiest Jews. And others lived a bit further away from the market square. And here, Vizhnitsa, so Austrian government expelled Jews from Vizhnitsa, then they were allowed to return. Then out of a sudden, in the 19th century, there were new Jews from Galicia coming. And immediately, there was a conflict between like old Jews and new Jews. Immediately there was this conversation, oh, we live on these streets, you don't come to these streets, you have to find an accommodation, in the other part of the city. This is very, very typical situation in most of the Jewish bigger towns and smaller shtetls, seeing even a Jew, but from another territory, as a foreigner, as a stranger, as maybe not even kind of 100% Jew. This is the former main synagogue of Vizhnitsa. The photograph here, it's the photograph of 1914, 1918. See, the synagogue was burned. These are the years of the First World War. See, First World War did not aim to threaten or murder Jews. There were other goals of that war. But in fact, because the battle area took place exactly on the territory occupied by Jews, First World War devastated the Jewish communities of Eastern Europe, not only killing Jews, not only leaving Jewish kids orphans, but also provoking the most terrible anti-Jewish pogroms. And also hundreds of thousands of Jews were relocated by the government, putting them away from the border. So First World War is one of the biggest disasters in our history, and rarely spoken about. So there are several books about it, about Jews in the First World War, and there were hundreds of thousands of Jews who fought in different armies, in the armies of their states during that war. But it's not that often that you see the book dedicated to that story. As a result of the First World War, Jewish community of Vizhnitsa, and this is the photograph from Vizhnitsa, Jewish community of Bukovina, Jewish communities of Ukrainian shtetls in general were devastated, were impoverished. Look at these Jews. Look how poor, they have nothing to wear. Everything they have was provided to them by you. The sign here says joint. Joint subsidizes this establishment. So it's during the First World War that in America, that American Jews formed Joint Distribution Committee and started sending money and food to Eastern Europe, because Jews were in such a terrible situation. So many Jewish families simply survived, physically survived, because they received the help that came to them from America. So all these kids and their mothers and their fathers, they just received something. See, they hold something, they received food, they received clothes, something to survive the hunger, something to survive the poverty. These are a couple of books: The Great War Against Eastern European Jewry and the World War I and the Jews. These are a couple of examples that you may look up, see if you find something else. It's as much as we speak often about the Second World War and the Holocaust, we speak rarely about the First World War and the most terrible impact it had on Eastern European Jewry. And again, the heyday of Vishnitsa is connected to the story of Vishnitsa rabbi. It's mid-19th century rabbi Menachem Mendel Hager settled here. He surrounded himself with hundreds and thousands of followers. Look at this postcard. It's like the court of the rabbi. You have here Beit HaMidrash, the place to study. You have Beit Malon, where the followers of the rabbi can stay. They have Ma'on Nesiyah, and they have another Beit Malon. So there was a lot of infrastructure built in the city specifically to accommodate the followers, those who would want to come and study with the Vishnitsa rabbi, or at least receive his blessing. And this is the it's the synagogue and the court, the house seats as Rabbiner's temple and one house. So it's the house and the synagogue of Vishnitsa rabbi. And these are some students, some Jewish students of the Hasidic yeshiva in Vishnitsa. The Jewish boys would come from different ends of at least the region, at least Bukovina, to study here. And we remember that to study in yeshiva was a way to go up on the social staircase. For a boy from a poor family who could go to yeshiva, whose parents could afford it, sending him to yeshiva, even if they're poor, but they can still decide, okay, I let him go. And if he studies well, he has a good chance to marry a daughter of the wealthy Jewish family, then receive the financial support from his father-in-law, and live a nice life. So yeshiva served as this social elevator, social lift in this part of the world. And we know that among the religious communities, the religious Jewish communities today, it's still the case. So here we have more photographs of Vishnitsa yeshiva boys, yeshiva bohers. See, they all wear longer pants. Long pants means that they are not kids anymore. When you are a Jewish boy, a child, you wear short pants. It's only when you go through bar mitzvah, you become an adult, then you have a right to receive longer pants. It's a very clear mark of the change. Even my grandfather, who was born in 1921, he remembered that moment in his life when he was first given proper long pants, like marking, now you're adult, grown up. These are more streets of Vishnitsa today. And you see there is even some place where you can find the trace of mezuzah at the entrance of the former Jewish home. From Bukovina, let's come to Podolia. Podolia, the most traditional Jewish region. It's here that we have Bratslav, Vinnytsia, Tulchin, Yampol, Mogilov, Kamenets-Podolsky. These are like these names. It's the most traditional Jewish towns. Of course, the most famous town here would be Medjugorje. Podolia was the territory of Podolia was terribly devastated by the Cossacks of Bogdan Khmelnytsky, and so many Jewish communities were murdered completely and then had to be rebuilt from the scratch. By the end of the 19th century, there were about 500,000 people living in all of this 500,000 Jews living on this territory in 88 different towns and villages. The unique feature of Eastern Europe in Jewish history is that there were so many Jewish towns, smaller and bigger. And every town was richly populated with Jews. So as a Jew, if you only spoke Yiddish, you could get by everywhere. You go from one place to another. You never need to spend a night with non-Jews. You go to another town, meet Jews there, and you know this is bed and breakfast, this is kosher food, this is the synagogue. It's kind of easy. It's this whole universe of the Jewish towns. So Medjugorje houses the oldest Jewish community in Podolia, which dates back to the early 16th century. It was the fortress built here and the town built next to this fortress. We know that in 16th, 17th century, it was flourishing town with interesting mix of population. They were Jews, Ukrainians, Poles, Greeks, Armenians, Germans living here. It was a very popular market in Medjugorje. And then so Jews were invited to come here by the local landlord. They were given piece of land for the synagogue and for the cemetery. And then Jews were even given special tax benefits. That's because Polish kings and Polish landlords were interested, economically interested in having Jews here. Because Jews would bring technologies from the West, would bring their business connections, and would be able to manage the property. Because without Jews, what you have the landlord and you have peasants. And so you need middleman because landlord wants to have good life and not watch what his peasants do daily. So you need someone who is able to read, write, who knows math, who can manage the property. And so Jews occupied this position very, very well. And this is the old photograph of the synagogue that was first built here in the 16th century. Does not exist anymore. And the market square. The market square, these are all Jewish homes. Jewish homes always have some business on the ground floor, and then the family would live either on the back, in the back rooms, or on the upper floors. Very often Jewish homes have balconies or little kind of a terraces. Why would you want to have this kind of a roofed terrace? On the market day, your daughter or your wife would stand, you would stay in your shop and selling products, and then your daughters or your wife would stay here inviting customers. So you want them to stand under the roof so they would not get wet because of the snow or rain. So that's how you have this terraced roofed entrance. And Medjugorje is one of the towns that was terribly, terribly devastated by the Cossacks. It's a town that had the community that had to rebuild itself. What you have here on the photograph, it's the most typical architectural thing, the most typical type of architecture, of Jewish architecture in Eastern Europe, not because the architect was Jewish, not at all, but because of the function of this building. In fact, it's actually several, it's at least two buildings connected to each other, and there is a passage, the roofed passage, so you can drive in. And in the courtyard of this house, you will have stables for the horses and kind of an improvised garage for the cart. This is bed and breakfast. It's a hotel. You can stay there and you can eat there and you can also buy something. It's called Wayside Inn, or in Russian Zayezd, and this is the most traditional architectural element of the Jewish shtetls. Only the wealthiest families were able to operate such properties because it was very profitable business to have Wayside Inn, to have bed and breakfast in the town, which houses at yearly fairs or monthly fairs. This is profitable business. Plus, you can sell alcohol, and alcohol is the basement of it's a base of the shtetl's economy. Medjugorje is also known for its connection with Baal Shem Tov, or Besht, the founder of Hasidic Judaism, founder of Hasidism as a movement. And so he established his first Hasidic community, the community of his followers here in Medjugorje in mid 18th century. So this town is forever in the Jewish history. This is considered to be the synagogue of Baal Shem Tov here, and some photographs of it. This white thing, This is the stove. This is the heater. Why we have heater here? Because this is not big synagogue. It's a small Beit Midrash. It's the place where Jewish men may spend the whole day. So you have to heat it, and you have a heater and hot water, and even some food can be preserved here, so man can come and even get a snack. These are some more homes of Medjugorje that historically belonged to Jews. Look at this building from Medjugorje. Again, this is the classical Jewish architecture of the shtetl. You have here some business on the ground, on this ground floor, then the balcony on the first floor. These are also business windows. So there would be one shop down here and another one up here. And then the family would live in the back rooms or on the upper floor. And this very balcony will serve as a sukkah during the holiday of Sukkot. Sukkot is the most painful holiday, I'm sorry to say that, in Eastern Europe because it's very cold. Because in Eastern Europe, you can't survive in separate sukkah if it's not attached to the main building. If you can't heat it in any way, you'll just die there because it might already snow. And then I remember in St. Petersburg when I was a child, we went to the synagogue and we had sukkah, and you have this nice sukkot dinner, and out of a sudden the rain pours through the roof of the sukkah, and you get soaking wet. So Sukkot is not an easy holiday to celebrate in Eastern Europe. In Medjugorje, there were 9 synagogues, and it's not too many. Believe me, in even the smallest shtetl, we see quite a number of different synagogues, and every Jewish man knew for sure this synagogue I go to, and that synagogue I never put my foot in. You may have synagogues that belong to different religious movements like Hasidic, Misnagdim, the followers of this rabbi, the other rabbi, or you can have the synagogue of the bookbinders, the synagogue of shoichets, the synagogue of, let's say, tailors. So it could be also synagogues divided because of the certain profession, the synagogue of the wealthier Jews, the synagogue of the poor, and so on. The Jews of Medjugorje owned almost all business in town, like hotels, bookstores, pharmacies, warehouses, manufacturers, grocery stores, everything. The economy of Medjugorje, quite like the economy of absolute majority of the towns in Eastern Europe, especially smaller ones, was run by Jews. This is a very special delicacy from Podolia that used to be cooked for Hanukkah. Instead of hamantashen, you have this wonderful pastry, like 2 waffles, with a rich filling. It's a mix of honey or jam you can use and nuts. Delicious, absolutely delicious, and you enjoy it during the Hanukkah nights. Another small town, Minkovci. Minkovci, very small place. Interestingly enough, even though it was a small shtetl, but according to the standards of Eastern European Jewish life, it was considered wealthy. How do we know that? We look at the documents of so-called Vaad of 4 lands. It's absolutely unique institution. It's the Jewish self-government of medieval Poland. It's the board of representatives. Jews Jews divided Poland into 4 sections, like north, south, west, and east. And each section voted for the representatives. They would come together and discuss all important matters and make decisions that were obligatory for all the Jewish communities in Poland. So even though so many documents of the Vaad of 4 lands were destroyed, still some of them survived, and so we can get so much information about the Jewish life from them. Look at this. See the photographs from the shtels, you keep seeing the same type of architecture, this way side in. So when we look at, for example, the documents issued by the local authorities, we see that already in the end of the 18th century, there was a number of Jewish houses in the center of the town. Like, for example, around the market square, there were 25 Jewish homes, including this Wayside Inn. They belonged to the wealthiest Jewish family. Don't be surprised if the house of the wealthy Jews looks like this. Wealthy according to our standards and wealthy then, it's a very different thing. And then here, from the local documents, we learn that in Minkovci, there was a special tax imposed on boilers that to produce alcohol. And so it was a tax that was imposed on every person who wanted to produce alcohol on the territory of Russian Empire. And so only the wealthiest Jews, it was kind of a state monopoly over the alcohol production. So if you wanted to produce and sell alcohol, you have to pay to the government up front, and then you can organize the production at home and sell alcohol, and nobody cared whether it was of good quality or bad quality. You could set the price, whatever you wanted. And usually it was the business of rather well-to-do families, even though they may look, especially from a distance, not too wealthy for us. They were also Jewish houses that did not face the square but were on the back, so they were called zatilne. Zatilak is this back side of the head, so the houses on the back, and they were mainly inhabited by the artisans. In a Jewish shtetl, in the Jewish traditional community, business people, those who had their own businesses, they were considered to be an elite of the shtetl. And artisans were kind of a lower middle class. They would not intermarry each other. They would not go to the same shul. They would live very separate lives. These are some photographs of the market square of Minkovitz. I already mentioned the alcohol. It was in Poland that this propination law was made. It's the law that stated that only nobility, Polish landlords, had a right to produce and sell alcohol, and the other people, the Christian population of Poland, the farmers, the servants, they had to buy alcohol from their landlord. They were not able to go to a neighboring region and buy alcohol there. Not at all. They were obliged to buy alcohol from their landlord. The peasants, if they did not want to drink, the alcohol was delivered to their home, so they still had to pay. And so Jews would come to the landlord and pay him up front to get this right, to start producing and selling alcohol under the name of the landlord. So that's how the economy of the shtetl worked. The production of alcohol was the main engine that kept the economy of the shtetl moving. And it was this propination law in Poland. Then in Russia, it changed into the state monopoly, but the system stayed more or less the same. You pay upfront, you receive this right, and then you have the monopoly over producing and selling alcohol on the particular territory. Nobody controls the quality or the price. We already saw some masonry synagogues in the smaller shtetls like Minkovitz. They were wooden synagogues. Unfortunately, wooden synagogues did not survive the 20th century, especially the Holocaust and the Second World War. We see them on the old photographs. We see them on some of the drawings, and this is part of our heritage, which is almost completely lost. So this is the main wooden synagogue of Minkovitz, here with the members of the Jewish community photographed in front of it. As I mentioned, see, there's no chimney. It's the grosse shul, the main synagogue. It's the cold shul. It never gets heated. You don't need to heat it. You don't use it as Beit Midrash. You go there for the service and leave so you can survive the cold. This extra little thing here on the left, this is either this or this little thing. could be a female section. Up until 19th century, Jewish women were not allowed under the same roof with men in the synagogue. So it's not only separate room, but it was always this extra section added to the main building. So they would have separate entrance and separate roof, like completely separated, and they could only hear and see something through the small windows. The wooden synagogues were beautifully decorated, gorgeously decorated. Their ceilings and were beautifully decorated with animals and birds and floral designs and the views of Jerusalem by the local Jewish artists. Again, this is something that unfortunately exists in photographs, almost exclusively in photographs. These are some pieces of the ceiling decoration of the synagogue. It represents, of course, Jerusalem. When we look at the houses, for example, in Minkovitz, we see that very often the walls are white color. They are covered with mix of like limestone and chalk, and there's clay on the floor. And the most important thing was to wash this floor with a mix of soap and salt. That was the way to that was the best measure against different insects, especially the cockroaches. And I remind you that very often in such house, you would have not only Jews or the family living, but you may also have a goat. You may also have geese. You may also have chicken living together with you and providing food to your family. Having a goat was the best thing that a Jewish family could afford. You have a goat, you have milk. You have milk, your family will survive. Minkovce is known for the fact that for about 30 years at the beginning of the 19th century, it was the most important center of Jewish printing in the region. It was just the initiative of one of the inhabitants of Minkovce. He opened the printing house and it became very, very popular. What would they print? They would print the religious literature and slowly, step by step, later in the 19th century, secular literature as well. Something special that was very popular in Eastern Europe, in all of the shtetls, and they were always those traveling bookbinders who would go from shtetl to shtetl selling books. Especially, who needed books? Very often women, very often Jewish women, they were looking for something to read because Jewish women often were literate in Yiddish, yes, and sometimes in Hebrew as well. So this lady, she is reading something called Tzena Urena. Tzena Urena, it's a special book published for women. It's a mix of biblical passages and teachings from the oral Torah and translated into Yiddish, kind of a simplified for women. And then finally, when you have time to rest during the Shabbos and then high holidays, then you can sit and read. Because outside of that, children never saw their mothers resting. Jewish women in the shtetl were busy day and night, running house, taking care of children, taking care of their husbands, very often running businesses that they inherited from their fathers. So it was only the Shabbos and high holidays when you're not allowed to work, then they could sit and read. There is a book that I would like to recommend you. It's called Reading Jewish Women. That's a very interesting book that explains how that whole story of reading transformed the life of Jewish women in Eastern Europe, how it modernized Jewish women, how literacy made Jewish women accept the new faster, become part of the modernized world faster. Let's come to another town. It's called Murafa. It's a small town, not too far from Vinnytsia, rather close to the border with Moldova. I remind you that we stay in the western part of Ukraine during our talk today. Remember what I said about the conflicts. How do we know? How do we learn about Murafa firsthand? We see the document, the response of the rabbi from Lviv, Lemberg, from Galicia, mid 17th century. It was the response to the complaint against a Jew from Murafa who provided government, local government, with some information about Jewish community. Jewish communities preferred to live in a complete autonomy, not to deal with governmental authorities, not to make anything known to the authorities. So when Jews had conflicts among them, if they could not solve it in the rabbinical court, they would go to the local authorities. And it was considered as unacceptable behavior. Applying to the local authorities to solve some Jewish problem, the problem among the Jews, your conflict with your fellow neighbor, was considered unacceptable behavior. And so here we have the response of the rabbi of Lviv, his opinion about the Jewish community of Murafa complaining that they have this informer in their community. You already recognize this architectural construction, this building on the photograph. You see all these features of Jewish home, this roofed terrace, the balcony on the second floor, some business down below here, another business here. These are all features of the Jewish traditional architecture. Look at the Murafa list of businesses of 1913. I'm sorry, it's in Russian, but the important thing that I would like you to see here, the female names, like haberdashery, Tsila, Maria, Pesa, Etla, Ella, Tsupa, Golda, Reza. Let's say other stores, Bela, Basa, Haika, manufacturing selling fabric, Brana, Gitla, Charna, Shlema, Maria, Basa, Rivka, Leba. Why do I tell you this? To explain that in Eastern Europe, in the shtetls, so many businesses, especially the smaller ones, so many different stores and warehouses belonged to women. It was classical for a daughter to inherit the business from her family and then run her business while together with the house, while her husband devoted his life to the Torah and Talmud studies in Beit Midrash. Much of traditional businesses were taken care by Jewish women. Up until the mid-1920s, different community institutions, different charitable institutions were funded from shchita. So it was a system that functioned everywhere in Russian Empire. It was the shochet and the rabbi who kind of rented the slaughterhouse from the state. So they paid again upfront to the state. And then they were able to set the price for their services. And that was the money that were put together to be spent for the needs of the Jewish community. Every shtetl, even the small one, needed shochet. Shochet was needed everywhere. No shochet, no food. That's clear. And then with rabbi, that's a different story. If you can't afford to hire and pay salary as a community to both shochet and rabbi, you choose shochet. Because without him, you can't survive. Then you will have somebody leading the service. Very often shochet can do that. And then when you need rabbinical advice, for example, on your family life, or you're not sure if this Brewster is kosher or not, or whatever, you go to the neighboring town. But with shochet, that's a must in a town. Rabbi, not that much. And very often rabbis were hired for a short period of time. So rabbinical families very often moved from one town to another. The wealthier the community, the better the salary. Another very well-known Jewish town, Shargorod, very old town that was built as a fortress to defend the southern border of Poland. And then Shargorod is famous for this masonry, old masonry, 16th century synagogue. It's time, 16th century, when the synagogues was built as forts. Very often it was the landlord who provided Jewish community with the architect, so that the main church, the house of the landlord, and the synagogue would be designed in the same style. This little addition, this is again the female section, you already know that. It's a question whether the synagogue and the synagogues of this type were actually used as a defense constructions, whether they were actual cannons put on top of it. It's a historical discussion. There's no one opinion on it. Quite a number of such masonry synagogues have survived even the Second World War, but many of them are in just very, very poor condition today. So this was the new, and this is the old photograph of this main Shargorod synagogue and pre-war photographs of its interior. We see it on the old photograph. It's taller than any other building in Shargorod. By the beginning of the First World War, there were about 5,000 Jews. And again, we have the photograph of the market square. We have those wayside inn facing the square, and some of the four other Jewish homes. The market square was full. Market squares in the shtetls were fully controlled by Jews. And this is the smaller home a bit further away from the market square. It's just one-story building. You have some business here and one or two living rooms in the back. And look at this house from Shargorod. It would be occupied by several Jewish families. There would be one family here, one there. And look at this little thing. This is the roofed terrace. It's another way of making sukkah. And in this case, you may have a special construction of the roof that you can slide a piece of roof, and then you will see the stars during the Sukkot when needed. This is also something very typical for the shtetls, because most of the shtetls, they have roots back in 14th, 15th centuries. So they used to have some old castle or some old fort that was not needed anymore in, let's say, 19th century. So if you look at the memoirs of every person who writes memoirs about the shtetl, he would say, oh, we had some old ruins, the old tower or something that by the late of 19th century was transformed into the space for smaller shops. So here you see the wall of the old fort is being used to attach the small shops selling different goods. All of them belong to Jews. Look at this barrel. It might be a barrel with water. They were water carriers in the shtetls, very poor people, who were bringing water to the wealthy Jews who did not want to go to the well by themselves. Let's look at one more place also connected to the story of Hasidim in Ukraine. It's Osatian. Osatian is famous again for Osatian Hasidim. It's a very typical Jewish town, very traditional Jewish town. And the interesting fact about Osatian is that when Poland was divided between Austria and Russia in 1772, the border went exactly through this town. So imagine you fall asleep, you're in Poland, let's say your close relatives live across the river from you, and you wake up, and out of a sudden you're Russian, and your relatives are Austrian, and there is a border between two of your houses. And it's not the only example of this. There were a couple of other towns that were also divided into two sections because of that partition of Poland. And because you're Jewish, you immediately understand how to benefit from that. Because you have border, you have international trade. You start organizing import-export operations, and it's very easy because you have your close relatives just across the border. So you can easily smuggle goods back and forth. I'm sorry to say that, but smuggling was a very traditional Jewish criminal business. I mean, it's illegal criminal business in Eastern Europe, and the change of borders and the borders that went exactly through the towns added to it and helped Jews do that. Usatin is famous for having a very well known and important Hasidic rabbi, and this is the postcard with it says Dvor Rabina. It's the court of the rabbi, his house, his Beit Midrash, Beit Malon, the hotel for those who wanted to come for his blessing. And Usatin was famous in all of Eastern Europe for having this important rabbi. And look at this wonderful, beautiful Masonry synagogue, old Masonry synagogue of the 18th century in Gusatin. Again, as many other Masonry synagogues, it exists. It just in a very poor condition, and there is really nobody to. It's unimaginable money to run the proper restoration. There's really nobody to take care of it. What else I would like to tell you, and we come to the end of our talk, and I'm going to come to turn into your questions very soon. As the towns grew, we see how slowly, step by step, Jews developed the infrastructure of the towns. Jews would open banks. Jews would organize the production of electricity. Jews would build sewerage systems for the towns. What sewerage system for towns? What we shall remember is that absolute majority of the population of the towns in Eastern Europe, historically, it was Jewish population. Jews lived and managed and operated the towns bigger and smaller in Eastern Europe. This is the photograph in front of the post office. And post office is also Jewish business because it's historically post office combined also the bed and breakfast. It was post office and bed and breakfast. So that's how in the western parts of Russian Empire, it was all operated by Jews. Before we finish our talk, I would like to show you this photograph of the burned synagogue of Wusat, and then also again remind you of the impact that the First World War and then the civil war in Russia had on Jews. It's absolutely tragic time. It's very difficult time. It's time that not only destroyed so many of the houses and the synagogues, but also took lives of the hundreds of thousands of Jews all around the territory of Ukraine. The subject of the Jewish pogroms in Ukraine of the period of 1918 to 1921 is very, very sensitive up until today. There was tremendous wave of anti-Jewish violence during the Civil War. There were over 1,000 accidents. I mean, the numbers of victims are difficult to estimate. There is a book which is called The Pogroms in Ukraine, Prelude to the Holocaust. It was already in 1930s in Europe that one of the historians said that the pogroms in what was then Russian Empire and then Soviet Union, especially the territory of Ukraine, actually led the way to the tragedy that would take place during the Second World War. So again, if you are interested in that period of time, find something to read up because this is the subject that is not very much being discussed. It's kind of in a way, it's much more sensitive than the subject of the Holocaust. I would not want to finish with the death, So I will finish with this photograph. This photograph of Nemirov, it's the classical view of the shtetl. You have all the kind of elements of the shtetl life. In order to build a town, you need water. How you get water? You need river. So you have the river. To build the mill, you need to put the barrel. So you have, instead of making just bridge, you put the barrel and then you have the mill near the water. The town is located on the hill so that the dirt would slide down. It was dirty in the shtetls. I mean, the high boots were necessary because it was really, really dirty. Then you have the church, you have the synagogue, you have the castle, and Jews occupying all those streets. Even from a distance, you may know that these houses, they all belong to Jews, living together, speaking Yiddish, and having a feeling that this is their world, even with the pogroms, even with the violence, even with the laws from the government. Still, it's this world of Yiddish, that famous Yiddish land. That's it. And it's very well represented here on this photograph. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm ready to hear your questions, of course.
Thank you so much, Evgenia, once again for an amazing talk and sharing with us all this history and driving us through the past. It was really, really fascinating to learn from you. And of course, thank you everyone for being here today. We want to let you know that with your contributions to Kesher, you're also donating to the Together Plan, which is a charity that we really recommend to find out about if you don't yet know them. They are mostly based in Belarus and they also work in other parts of the former Soviet Union to preserve heritage and revive the Jewish communities. So thank you also for that. Thank you everyone also for all the comments. I'll try to read out as many questions as possible. Maybe some of them I will generalize a bit more just to make it relevant for everybody here. But we'll try to answer as many as possible. So I'll start with Stuart's comment and question. I have a book of photographs of the wooden synagogue of Eastern Europe. The photographs were hidden from the Nazis and had survived the Shoah. Were the synagogues of Ukraine part of these beautiful wooden structures?
Oh, thank you, Stuart, very much for your question. The answer is yes. The synagogues in Ukraine are considered to be synagogues of Eastern Europe. So, yes, they're, of course, part of that whole tradition of building the wooden synagogues.
Thank you. Are there any records of average height and weight of adults in different time periods?
Huh, that's an interesting question. You know what? There are some medical reports. There are some medical reports, let's say from the late 19th century, that give us a picture of not Jews were not tall, not at all. Jews were Jews, according to those medical reports, had rather poor health, and it also coincides with the fact that, remember, every fourth child experienced the death of at least one parent. So adults died at the young age because of different diseases, because of cold, because of hunger, because they could not get medical help in time. The death of a child was regular. You keep giving birth to children and unfortunately keep dying. The rate of the child death was 13-14%, and that was much better than the child death rate among the non-Jews. There, among the peasants, that was about 50%. So people were thin and not very tall. They constantly had issues with food. They constantly had shortage of food, and never ate really well. And maybe that's why our holidays are so filled with food. Usually, averagely poor Jewish family would eat properly once a week, Friday night.
Thank you. So Sneer shared with us a lot of his family story. I'll just ask a few general questions from here. Does the name Wiener mean Vienna or wine, in your opinion?
Wine, wine, wine.
Okay, because
I,
one of the follow-up question was whether there were people going from Vienna to these areas, but it's
wine.
not likely. And you spoke about Višnjica being a Hasidic place. Does that mean that it was fully Hasidic, or were there other type of Jews also?
Um, Vizhnitsa was almost fully Hasidic. Um, it was not, there was some territories, especially in Belarus, where you see mix of Litvaks, Misnagdim, and Hasidim, never lacking each other, they still don't. But Ukraine was almost all Hasidic. And
Thank,
there's this all long conflicts. Litvaks would always look at Hasidic Jews or Galician, Podolian, and others as, we're there and you're here.
thank you. The next question is it accurate that the Jews tended to own businesses because they were forbidden to own agricultural land? And do you believe the fact that they owned businesses contributed to resentment by the non-Jews?
Yes and yes. Thank you for your question. Jews were Jews were not allowed to buy land, and so they were not allowed to become farmers. In the most cases, there were some exceptions, but I would not go into those details because it's another hour. But in general, Jews were not allowed to have land. Jews were not allowed to be farmers, and Jews were specifically invited, specifically settled here to run businesses because there was nobody else to run business. Medieval Poland, you have landlords have no interest in running their own business, and you have peasants who have no ability to run their business because they're illiterate. It was only bigger crown cities like Lviv, for example, or Krakow, where you had Germans or Greeks or Armenians who would do crafts and run businesses. And so, as a landlord, you need somebody who would take care of business in your area. So you invite Jews, and that's it. This is the economical niche of Jews. And yes, of course, it caused lots of conflicts and lots of tension between peasants and Jews. It's this classical Marxist type conflict, the conflict explained by Karl Marx, the conflict between the village and the town, and people of the village think that those living in town don't work enough and they're lazy and they just make money and that's it. So, yes, there was a lot of tension, but I personally think that anti Semitism is illogical. So, historically, the conflicts could exist based on many different reasons. The result is always the same.
Thank you. The next question was if Mogilev Podolsky is named like that because it's in Podolia.
It's in Podolia because there were two towns named Mogilov, and one of them was in Podolia, so it was named Mogilov Podolsky. Like there are two towns named Rostov, and one became Rostov on Don because it's located on Don River. Same thing.
Thank you. The next question I know is one that you have an entire talk designated to, but maybe you can give a brief answer. How is a shtetl defined? Is a large city a shtetl or just a small one, or how would you determine?
It's true that I have a whole talk about the Shtetl, a Jewish universe, and I welcome you to look up for it, whether with Kesher or on my own website. We have more than an hour to speak about the phenomenon of Shtetl. In general, Shtetl, it's the Yiddish word which comes from the German word Stadt. Stadt means city, so Shtetl, it's a small town, tiny little town. It's something in between the village and the town. And Shtetl, historically, it's the small market town of Eastern Europe, the town which where the life goes around the market square, and majority of its population would be Jews. That's, in a short way, that's the shtetl.
Thank you. Well, you did an amazing job summarizing an hour and a half talk. The next question is about the restriction of women to a separate building in a synagogue and how widespread that was, or in which areas would you find that?
In at least in Eastern Europe, we would not go to Spain or Germany or Italy now. I mean, it's too much. But at least in Eastern Europe, the tradition of Ashkenazi Jews that they brought with them from Germany was that women had their own section, but it was not built in. It was attached, as you saw in the photographs, to the main building. So theologically, you have one building, synagogue, where men gather, and this is not place for women. Women have no place there. We make small attachment, this little thing that we attach to the main building under the separate roof. And so women, if they want so, can go there and watch and listen. Because the general attitude that there is nothing for women in the synagogue. There's this famous letter that Gaon of Vilna, see, one day the famous Gaon of Vilna, the leader of Litvaks, decided to go to Jerusalem. He forgot to tell his wife about his decision, so she just left home. You know, like you go to buy bread and you disappear. So he left home and then started his way to Jerusalem, and then he sent the letter to his wife. In that letter, not that, no, he does not apologize. He does not tell her, oh, you know, darling, I'm sorry. I just felt the need to go to Jerusalem. Not at all. He instructs her not to, the only matter of that letter, to instruct her, his wife, not to let their daughters to go to the synagogue because there's nothing good that is awaiting them there, because girls go to the synagogue only to gossip, so they better stay home. So the general attitude that there is nothing good for women in the synagogue, and then women cannot bring anything good in there. That's it.
Thank you. On the description of the talk, we mentioned that you will be speaking about Hotin, and someone was really curious about this place. Do you have maybe, I don't know if you have those slides or if you have one or two pictures to show us, just to.
Ah, Khotin, it's an interesting town. It's a town that was part of, see, the thing about Khotin is that it was part of Bessarabia. It was part of Bessarabia, which is modern day Moldova. It only became part of Ukraine after the Second World War. So I have a talk about Bessarabia. And then what's true for Bessarabia Jews would be true for Khotin. Um,
Okay, if
that
you
would
don't have it
be
ready,
that.
don't worry.
I don't
We'll,
have
we'll
nothing
actually
handy
have
here.
also the talk about Bessarabia with Evgenia will be in October, if I'm not mistaken. So hopefully you will be able to join us then as well. But thank you for still sharing a bit of information about it here. We're slowly running out of time, but I'll try to, maybe we can do a couple more questions. Let me just okay, one second. Um, there was a question, why would a shtetl family be seen higher or lower status? What would give them the higher status? Was it a rabbinic lineage or other factors?
Thank you for the question. It's also a big theme that I cover in my talk dedicated to the shtetls. In general, there are three factors that make the family, three factors that make the family top class in the shtetl. It's money. If no money, no status. It's lineage. If you can trace your roots, back to some rabbis. If you can say, in my family, we never ever had a single artisan, only the rabbis and the business owners, that would be good. That makes you elite. So money, lineage, and of course the knowledge. You have to show your deep knowledge and understanding of the religious matters. And these three factors makes you elite. It has to come together. And this puts the clear line between business people and artisans. Because if you own a business, if you have your own store or hotel or tavern, you don't have restaurant, you have a tavern, then you can work little and spend much money, devote much time on Talmud and Torah and Gemara studies. You can sit comfortably at home with your friends, with the fellow gentlemen, and study, or you can have your own Beit Midrash. And then your wife will take care of the business, and then you will come to the store only on the market day once a week. Now, if you make shoes, it doesn't matter how well you do it. The money you make depend on the number of shoes you make, because you can't raise prices because there's nobody to pay more. People are poor. So you have to make more shoes. You have to work day and night to earn a living, and then you have very little time to devote to the only thing that a respectful Jewish man has to do, to study. The only thing that the respectful Jewish man has to devote his life to is to study Torah, Talmud, all that. But as an artisan, you have very little time that you can devote to this. This makes you kind of a second class. And so the children of these two groups would never intermarry. It's inappropriate, impossible. They belong to two different worlds.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll ask one last question, but I want to let all of you know that tomorrow you'll receive follow-up resources. You will send you many further links to where you can research genealogy. We'll send Evgenia's website, so you can also receive that. You will have book recommendations, so you'll have the chance to study a bit more. And we'll also have more talks scheduled with Evgenia in the near future. Exactly in a month from now, she'll speak about the Jews of Crimea. And then we'll also have the talk about Bessarabia in October and many more. You'll receive, of course, from us newsletters if you are registered, and you will find out about all this. So I'll ask the last question. What was the impact of emigration out of Jewish towns in the late 19th century and early 20th?
Thank you very much. 1881, spring of 1881, it's the beginning of the anti-Jewish pogroms on the territory of Russian Empire. It's the year when Russian Tsar was wounded by the terrorists and then died there in St. Petersburg, and the Jews were blamed for that. And the first wave of anti-Jewish pogroms kind of run over the territory of the Pale of Settlement, which changed the Jewish history of Eastern Europe once and forever. Most historians of Eastern European Jewry would divide the history before 1881 and after 1881. Those pogroms changed the kind of attitudes to life, especially among the younger generation. It's the moment when especially younger Jews started leaving homes, crossing the ocean, going to America, joining different social parties, joining the proto-Zionist movements, because they saw that government did not defend them. The government did not defend Jews against those troops of those robbers or neighbors who violently went into their homes and to rape and murder and rob. And so this is the critical here. Altogether, within 20 years, let's say from 1881 to 1920, there were over 2 million Jews that left Russia. 2 million Jews, majority of them ended up in the United States and created, Ashkenazi Jewish community of the United States as we know it today. That's it. Very often there was a man going first, and then he would make money and come back to pick his family and then go. So, or they were the immigration, there are like millions of different stories, but it started in 1881, and then in 40 years, it was like 2 million Jews.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for the many questions. I hope most of them were answered, and if not, you will have resources received tomorrow. This Sunday is our next event, which will be the Karaites of Egypt. So this coming month we'll focus on Karaites twice. One focusing more on the Egyptian Karaites and their special traditions, and with Evgenia in a month from now, the Karaites of Crimea, and also the story of Crimea other than the Karaites. So there will be a lot to learn about this of this special community. So thank you everyone once again for joining us. Thank you, Evgenia, for another fascinating talk. And we hope to see you all very soon, and we wish you a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you. Stay well. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.